Outstanding work of our change agents and Dr. Johnny Cruz Craig. We worked on different topics, not just the normal thing. You know, we worked on culturally relevant teaching, social and emotional learning, trauma-informed classrooms, and the whole child, just to name a few.
In terms of what you all are doing and what it means to us and what it means to everyone, education is a foundational key. I think it was George Washington Carver that said education is the key to freedom, which is the tie and the link between education and social action.
Delta pushed early on that it's not just matriculating through a scripted curriculum that may not teach needed life and adaptive skills. We have been pushing through our gyms and other programs that you need to focus on educating the whole person so that our next generation has the basic life skills to navigate and adapt in now an even more demanding and unrelenting world environment.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. We are super excited to be here with you guys today. I am joined by my colleagues, Valerie Morgan Simmons, as well as Dr. Marcus Matthews, who is our featured speaker. We are grateful for your presence today. The title of our session today is Batters Up, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And so we're going to run the bases. We're going to address social emotional learning, restorative circles, trauma-informed care, exclusionary discipline, and personal mirrors. So before we jump into who we are, we want to know who's in the room. So if you guys could, using another device, go to menti.com and enter the code 9240762. Again, go to menti.com. You can go on your cell phone. You can open up an additional window on your computer or your iPad, any device that is connected to the internet. If you could, please go to www.menti.com and enter the code 9240762. I'm going to stop sharing this screen because I want to share another screen so that we could actually see your responses. And so if you give me 1 second, I'm going to share the other tab so that we can see how you guys are responding. Okay, so the responses are coming in. Perfect, perfect, perfect. And we'll give you about 30 seconds. Now we see that there are at least 10 people on Facebook. So we know there are a few others of you out there. And we can't see the metrics from YouTube. So if you could, we'll give you a little more time. Okay. And so about 30 more seconds. And good morning to all the people that are joining us on Facebook. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Okay, so you guys, we have 6 respondents. And so you guys can continue with that one, but I do want to move to the next slide because now we're going to start digging into the meat of what we're addressing today. And so what we would like you to do is to share 5 things that come to your mind when you see the word trauma. And you can stay on that same page. The slide should have changed on whichever device you are using. And we just want your input. What comes to mind when you see the word trauma? And the responses are coming in. I am going to set a timer for 2 minutes from this moment. Oh, wow. Incapacitation, bad experience, unworthy, fear, triggers. Awesome, awesome. We have about 1 minute and 13 seconds remaining, so feel free to keep adding responses. We are down to the last 30 seconds. Okay, that is our timer. So thank you for that. Dr. Matthews and Ms. Simmons, they're going to join us in dialogue before we get to our introductions. So I'll leave this screen up for a few seconds, guys.
And looking at some of the words that were posted for the word trauma, one thing that comes to my mind is being that I teach at a school where the population is majority Hispanic. Trauma comes through differently. So in different cultures, they express their trauma differently. You know, we have the kids that are attention seeking, And so it's their cry for help, whether it's through cutting or self-harm. But I see trauma in a variety of different ways based on the different cultures that I have at my school. So all of them are basically triggers, as someone stated earlier, that there is a cry for help and that they are trying to reach out to someone so that they can get the help that they need.
When we look at the point, when we look at the definition of trauma, even from like a Webster sense, and we say a deeply distressing or a deeply disturbing event, that really paints a broad picture, because what may traumatize me may not traumatize someone else, right? And so how we respond to these events differs. And one interesting thing about trauma, when we start talking about compound trauma, is the more trauma we experience, the more we begin to normalize abnormal behaviors and circumstances. So the more trauma I experience, like if I got stuff going on at home, it's nothing for me to punch the kid beside me, right? Because that's normal. That's what I see in my community, in my home. So why am I in trouble for punching the kid beside me? We punch each other all the time. My mama punches my dad, right? The people in the neighborhood punch each other. So we have to think about trauma in that sense of how it relates. And as you mentioned earlier, from one community to the next, from one individual, one household to the next.
Thank you so much for that. So now we are actually going to get into who we are as educators doing this great work. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and then go back to our presentation. And that was such a great point with us normalizing it, Dr. M. I never thought about it from that lens. So thank you so much for sharing. And so now tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. My name is Dr. Marcus Matthews. I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. Okay, we got my slide up now. I'm the executive director of the Matthews Fame Foundation, which is actually a foundation that I started to provide resources and support for youth. I'm a professor at the American College of Mental Health Education, and we'll talk about those courses that I teach there. And I'm also an assistant principal at Youth Villages. Youth Villages is so interesting because we're a nonprofit that strictly deals with youth who are challenged with mental, behavioral, and emotional trauma. So every student in my school, and I work in an all-male high security facility. So we're talking about some of the most challenged students, and we get them from across the country. Before moving to Youth Villages, I received my doctorate of education from the University of Memphis, my master's in instruction and curriculum leadership also from the University of Memphis, and my bachelor's too. So you can see I'm a Memphis guy. I even got my leadership license from Christian Brothers University, which is also in Memphis, Tennessee. And one of the interesting things when I talk about Memphis, particularly, right, when we get the global perspective, the national perspective, when we look at how we measure proficiency or how we measure education, and we talk about graduation rate, literacy, numeracy, Tennessee is going to be, it's historically one of those 5 bottom ranking states, along with your Mississippi and your Arkansas. And then when we look at Tennessee as a state, and then we think about the city of Memphis, we have an achievement school district, which was designed to address the bottom 5% of low performing schools in Tennessee. And about 90% of those schools in that bottom 5% come from Memphis. So when we talk about my background, I went to elementary, middle, and high school in Memphis. My high school was actually so low performing that we would close down. So I don't have a high school homecoming to return to now because of low performance. And even our middle school is one of the middle schools that was taken over by the state. And so this is my personal educational background before moving on to the University of Memphis. So when we talk about the lens from Memphis, we're talking about some of the most challenging situations that our country has to offer here. So that's the lens that I'm coming from. Couple data points just recently, I was dean of students at a Shelby County school, middle school, and we went from level 1, the lowest level that we have to offer, to level 5, which is the highest level, in 1 year. And I was in charge of our response to intervention, our RTIB. Some states still use PBIS, positive behavior incentive support. So I led that initiative. We lowered suspension rates by 26% in 1 year. And that's something that we really boast. Our principal was actually named middle school principal of the year for our district, which has which has over 100 schools. So that was a great year for us. And then I'm the author of Urban ACEs, How to Reach and Teach Students Traumatized by Adverse Childhood Experiences. So I'm really excited about this conversation about trauma and ACEs today.
Good morning, everyone. I am Valerie Morgan Simmons. I am also a proud member of the Georgia Dream Team. I am an assistant principal in Gwinnett County Public Schools here in Georgia. I'm also a proud graduate of Florida A&M University. And as you can see on the screen, education was not my first calling. I majored in business administration. And of course, after working in corporate America and thinking that, I'm going to climb that corporate ladder and be some high position person within corporate America, I found my love for teaching actually in church. And so I'll say it was truly a God's calling. I started teaching Sunday school, and that's where my love for teaching came. And that's how I sought out becoming an educator. I've taught in Florida as well as in Georgia. I have 21 years of experience in education. I spent 18 years in the classroom as a middle grades math teacher, and I am in my 3rd year as an assistant principal, so 3 years in leadership. All of my teaching experience has been in the Title I schools. So for some reason, obviously that's a calling as well, to basically give back and be able to help those students who are not as fortunate as some of us. And basically that 90% free and reduced lunch plays a vital part in who our students are and who the students are that we serve on a daily basis. And so I love the work that I do, and I am thrilled every day that I go to work and try to impart some type of knowledge that I have on the students and in the families that I come in contact with on a daily basis.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matthews and Ms. Simmons. I am Dr. Charshunda Covington, the proud principal of a school here in Georgia in the DeKalb County School District. I graduated from South Atlanta High School. I like to start with that because our high school at the time was one of the worst high schools in the Metro Atlanta area. I left South Atlanta High School, went to Spelman, went to Central Michigan. I have 2 doctorate degrees. One in educational leadership and the other one in organizational leadership. But it wasn't until I started I did 5 years in the classroom, but it wasn't until I started doing school improvement work with the focus on literacy that the light came on for me. So education is really my heart's work. I absolutely love what I do. I prefer to work in the most challenging schools. Ms. Simmons and I have that in common, and it's the same schools that Dr. Matthews attended. So that's another thing that connects all 3 of us here today to speak with you. But again, as our fearless leader, Dr. Johnny Cruz Craig always says, education is a heart matter. And so our goal today is to speak with you, share some experiences, dig a little deeper in those things that create trauma for our students and how to resolve it, how to move to the next level. So we are super, super excited to be here with you guys. I can't really speak for them, but I'm super excited because I can't wait to learn from Dr. Matthews and Ms. Simmons and just the dialogue. So thank you again for joining us today. Sorry.
All right, the next quote that's on the screen basically says, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. And when you think about that quote, especially as an educator, you know, we teach because we have a passion for what we do. We teach because we want to impart something, that knowledge that we have, on the next generation of students that pass through our doors. We don't do it for the money because we know we're not going to get rich teaching in the classroom, but we do it because there is a richness that we impart on our students and the love that we have for our students. And so education is definitely a heart matter, as Dr. Johnny Cruz awesome all the time tells us. And so we teach because we love our students and because we love what we do each day.
Absolutely. When I think about that quote, I automatically reflect to my first full year as a classroom teacher. And one of my students, and when I say this young man could sing, he could sing. And, you know, he was singing a hallway, and his mind was made up that he was going to be a professional singer. But he was in my English class. I taught English for 10 years. And like, he would just randomly, Mr. Matthews, why do we have to do this? Like, why does this even matter? Like, and I had to try to find a way to make it make sense for him. It bothered me that it did not make any sense for this young man, because he was, you know, a respectful young man, talented, and he just wanted to know, why are we reading this British literature, you know? And so I helped him to understand, like, when you get that singing contract, we want you to be able to read that contract, and we want you to be able to understand the language there. So we're practicing right now. We're practicing breaking down language and understanding what an author's purpose is, so that you, when you go out into the real world, can have that singing contract, and you can read it and understand it. And so for me, it became a heart matter. And you know, early on, I see it now that was one of my foreshadowing events, that it would be about not only teaching, but helping to make sure we're meeting students where they are. And so that's absolutely a heart matter.
Absolutely. So we are going to just jump right in. We're going to start thinking about some of the questions, getting into why we're here. We want to learn everything we can about adverse childhood experiences. We want to make sure that as we are entering our buildings, that we enter them next week with a new understanding. So we are going to be leaning on you heavy, Dr. Matthews, but
Absolutely.
we feel like you got us.
Absolutely. You're in great hands. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. And as Dr. Covington was showing you, this is the book that we will be discussing today. It is a quick and easy read, but it is also an enjoyable read, I must say. I will say that as I read it, it really pulled at my heartstrings, because I could really relate to some of my childhood experiences that I had as a child growing up. And just knowing that, you know, I can always talk about that teacher that I was able to make that connection with, and how I found myself, you know, from the community that I grew up in, which was pretty rough, especially around the time when crack cocaine was really becoming this prevalent drug, and it was just really tearing up our community. So our first question for you today basically is, what do you feel are the most important factors with the current state of education and where we are today?
That's a great question to start with. And when my work in trauma began to really take form, COVID happened, right? And so what COVID did was it exposed the fact that we weren't where we needed to be technologically, right? Our students having access to technology, having mastery of the ability to use technology, as well as our educators having access and ability to use, and we think about Wi-Fi and hotspots and access, right? That's an access issue, which is also an equity issue. So, you know, I always say, if I'm going to get an oil change and my motor falls out, I got to deal with my motor, right? So the oil change gonna have to come a little later. So we definitely, I think, are still working on how to get those technology issues worked out. And as doors are reopening and we're going back into schools, we have to realize that we're going to deal with students and have to support students who have been over traumatized now. COVID has had and added an extra trauma. And when we think about our children who are being abused at home, in the community, they were being abused even more because they didn't have the opportunity to go to school to get that release. Our children who are being neglected, they've experienced even more neglect because now where I would be at school for 8 hours with my friends and my teachers, I've been at home being neglected, right? Those students who need those 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch, and some that have afternoon programs and evening, those students have been malnourished even more. So it's a very real issue that we have to consider when we think about students coming back to us, and some of us, we've gotten a little comfortable, working from home and, being able to spend time with our families and our children. But when we really think about, the effect that our traumatized students are having to deal with is crucial. So to connect that with the answer to your question, absolutely, we think about equity, social justice, and when those are broad terms, right? So when we chisel that down and we talk about social and emotional learning, we talk about trauma-informed teaching. We talk about being able to use inclusive disciplinary practices. We talk about things as simple as relationship building. This is where we are right now. So definitely trauma, social emotional learning, and the elimination of exclusionary practices. So how can we practice discipline in a way that's inclusive and keeps our students in the building?
Thank you so much. And you hit on one thing I wanted to talk about. When you started talking about technology and the equity issues, it's one thing for educators because we're using the technology even before, COVID-19 hit. But to have now, the students now have to learn to work from a electronic platform where all of their lessons are being taught to them. But it also put our parents at a disadvantage as well, because it's one thing for them not to be able to help their child when they were in the classroom, but now they really are struggling because they can't help their child on that digital platform as well.
And that contributes to trauma. It goes back to when we think about compound trauma. Like we said, I'm dealing with this, now I'm also dealing with that, right? So the student is already hungry. The student is already dealing with mental abuse. The student already has a parent who's incarcerated. The student is already dealing with these multiple complex traumas. And sometimes, I've done professional developments in more affluent areas, and they may say, well, our children, they're not dealing with gangs, and they're not dealing with some of these other traumas. But guess what? Even that divorce between mom and dad, that separation, that is trauma. That is household dysfunction. So when mom and dad, hold their conversation and say, hey, it's best for us not to be together anymore, but we're still both here for you, that's still trauma for that child. So we have to keep in mind, how all of these traumas definitely play together and compound.
And so one of the things you mentioned with the equity piece, because I am fortunate to work in a district where we were able to distribute devices to all of our scholars from pre-K to 12th grade, right? But now that they have the devices, this goes back to what Valerie was saying, they have to know how to use them. And if they can't use them and their parents can't use them, they're still, as you just stated, still experiencing trauma because now they have everything to come to the table, but the playing field is still not leveled. Because again, there are the questions about, do we provide training on how to use the devices? coupled with they're already on the devices for 8 hours a day. So when?
But
the other,
go ahead.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
You touched a nerve. I talked to one of my cousins, and it was so fortunate, and because we have to realize the dichotomy that's going on here. We have to address the elephants in the room, right? The haves and the have-nots, and how this is impacted us all. So I had a cousin who he and his wife were able to work from home and spend more time with their kids. And so it's like, okay, wow, we see that this is actually an opportunity for them to have a different, impact, a different result from this COVID reaction. But when we think about the parents who do not have the opportunity to stay, they have to go to work. They have bills to pay. What are we doing in this situation? How is this playing out when students are being told look, I got to go to work. You log in and do what you got to do. You make sure you stay home and take care of your business. Mm-hmm. That's a very challenging situation to put a child into. And then I've talked to teachers where, big brother is in the room, but he's also cooking breakfast for little brother and little sister. And he's, feeding diapers, right? Changing diapers and feeding siblings. So, there's so many issues that surround this particular situation that we could go in a million different directions. And at the end of the day, we would still end up right back at trauma. And that's why this conversation is so important, because we have to understand how trauma affects the brain, how it affects the student's ability to articulate, to mature, to even receive the education, right? When we even get into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can't teach hungry, right? We cannot teach hungry. We gotta get that kid gonna have to have a fiber bar, a cookie, or some apple, banana, something. So how are we addressing those issues and making sure that we respect the fact that those issues exist?
Absolutely. So that takes us into our second question. You shared with us different components of trauma, but could you share with us the different components of adverse childhood experiences? Because some of us may be familiar with what it means, but not know that it's all related to that concept.
Absolutely. Adverse childhood experiences, of course, we're talking about ages 0 to 17. And when we look at, so the original study, and I love this, was actually in the late 90s, and 2 doctors were helping people lose weight, right? And so in this weight loss program, the participants stopped losing weight. They stopped the plan and they moved back towards obesity. And the doctors were curious as to why this happened. And the reason was some of the participants had been abused sexually. And their defense mechanism was to try to make themselves unattractive. And so they wanted to maintain this image. They wanted to be overweight. They didn't want to they didn't want to, in their minds, make themselves attractive. And so that kind of led to more questions about the impact of childhood trauma and how the things that happen to us in our childhood affect us in our adulthood. That study led to 3 categories, and those categories were abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. So abuse being physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. Then in neglect, we're talking about physical neglect, emotional neglect, and then, of course, household dysfunction, having a parent who's incarcerated, having a parent being in a single parent household. And so that ACE test went from 0 to 10. And there was an ACE score associated. And the higher your ACE score, the higher your likelihood of these detrimental effects, such as suicidal attempts, suicidal ideations, obesity, heart disease, even when you get to an ACE score of 4, there's a higher likelihood of alcoholism, drug abuse. Once you get to an ACE score of 6, you are likely to lose 20 years on your life expectancy. You die 20 years earlier here when we're talking about an ACE score of 6. And my ACE score is absolutely a 6, right? So that definitely piqued my interest. But why I went with the title Urban ACEs, because this is a study in the late 1990s, and these were college-educated, middle-class white people who were interviewed for this study. The CDC now realizes and recognizes that being in an educational environment that is poor and being in a poor economic environment and systematic racism also contribute to levels of trauma. So we have this study from 20, 30 years ago, but then we also have to look at systematic racism, poverty, and poor education and how they contribute to trauma as well. So that's what we're talking about today when we're talking about adverse childhood experiences.
Thank you so much for that. And as you see, the people in the chat, they're like, where can I take it? Can I take the assessment online? So if anybody is listening finds it, add it to the chat, because I need to complete that assessment as well. But 20 years on your life expectancy. And I think what that highlights, because again, this is not a conversation just about culture, so to speak. But I think that's critical when you take that lens in, because in most Black households, what happens in this house stays in this house. So you can't even address the trauma that students may or scholars may or may not be participating or experience, because it's not something that we're supposed to tell people outside of the home, right? And just thinking for the student that wants to get out, the student that wants to win, the student that can go against all odds, they're in a place where they can't even speak about it. And so one of the things I heard in all of our introductions is we are products of that those challenging environments. But I think for the students that are listening or the parents that are listening, there's power in that. You don't have to succumb to what surrounds you. Find your light at the end of the tunnel and break through. So I'm sorry, that was not a part of what we're supposed to be discussing, but I would not be Charshunda if I didn't throw that in. So I'm sorry.
You're absolutely right. And I don't know if my father's up early enough this morning, but we actually had a heart-to-heart conversation because I do share my life story and I do talk about my personal life in the book, as you all were able to read. And we have to be able to heal. We have to be able to heal. And so, we think about those people who are in those AA groups. You got to go in and say, hey, I'm Marcus, I'm an alcoholic. Until you go through that stage, you're not able to go through those other stages. So we have to be able to look at our personal situations and say, hey, this is my truth. This is what happened to me. And this is how we're able to help future generations, because we don't want our students to have to deal with something that we know we can help with. We know we can help with this. We have the tools, we have the knowledge, we have the opportunity to help our children. So it behooves us to put our personal feelings to the side. And again, I really take a hat off to my dad and my mom as well, to allowing me to share my personal story so that we could help others. This is a team effort.
Thank you so much for that.
All right. The next question is, who should read Urban Aces, and what do you anticipate they will get out of reading this book?
I would begin with saying that anyone who works with youth should read Urban Aces. We're able to deal with what we know, right? And we know that we are living in a very challenging time, and our children are dealing with trauma. So it's great for school districts. It's great for professional development. The last PD that I provided in Middle Tennessee, the feedback I got from that district, they're like, look, I was at one particular school. They said we need the entire district to have this PD. So it's absolutely great for school districts, universities who are teaching teacher education programs, but it's also good for that parent. It's good for, because during COVID, I also spoke to some parent groups, and guess what? They had to help play teacher with their own children. And so I know my educators are smiling right now because they got to see when people say, he don't do that at home. She don't do that when she here. Yes, she does. You just don't get that experience. So some of those parents at home got to see, what their little angels were doing when they're asked to complete tasks. So anyone who's dealing with the opportunity to support a youth, they should be reading Urban Aces. Also, anyone, even as an adult, who's dealt with trauma, because we've got to circle back and address our own trauma. And as a result, I'm so glad you all keeping the question posed because I just started talking. As a result, healing, and we talk about resilience and we talk about recovery. Those are two terms that I have really become very close with, resilience and recovery, because when we think about trauma, it's so negative. The events are negative, the outcomes are negative, and it's just a very heavy discussion. But the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is resilience, right? And when I say that, we think about people during the Great Depression who were committing suicide because they went from having $100 million to $5 million. How am I going to live with $5 million? I'm not going to be able to survive. And they committed suicide. That was traumatic for them because they never had to overcome the type of adversity that others had to overcome. So when I talk to you all who are from, your respective neighborhoods, hoods, right? And we think about our friends and our colleagues who have this quality of resilience. When they say, look, our books didn't make it. We don't have books yet. We like, okay, we got something for that. All right, everybody, we about to get these newspapers, right? We gonna come up with a way to get this lesson done. We got lockdown, guys. We're gonna, and I've been in schools where there may be a weapon in the building, and the building goes to lockdown, and then we're in one classroom for 3-4 hours. You got to have some resilience. You got to be able to make a way out of no way, which is one of the chapters in my book, right? But when you've never faced adversity, when you've never overcome adversity, then where do you get resilience from? And I was talking to one of my friends from the neighborhood who's also a doctor of education, and he's done a great job, does great work, and he was talking about his daughters and their lack of resiliency because they grew up in a different environment. Dad successful, mom successful, kids a little spoiled. They got a little. They're not facing the challenges that mom and dad face, and so he was trying to find ways to create resiliency. So we have to remember that when our students are going through what they're going through, if we can just help them get through it, if we can just get them to that finish line, whether that finish line is this course or this grade or graduation or college or that master's degree, if we can just get to that finish line, that pot of gold is there. And when I talk to my African-American males, especially, I talk about when we think about a triangle and we think about the way that capitalism works, and you got people at the top, a few and a lot at the bottom, the way society sees us as Black men, right? We all at the bottom. That's just the look. But once you find out who I am, right? Once we start talking about, oh, okay, so you've written these books, so you're a doctor of education, so you've overcome these struggles. Okay, you're a different kind of guy. So that now you're moving to the top to where, guess what? You the commodity. You are the commodity. That's why LeBron James can say, all right, Cleveland, I'm gonna holler at y'all. I'm gonna take my talents to South Beach because you're not giving me what I need to be successful. But LeBron James couldn't do that if he never practiced. LeBron James couldn't do that if he didn't have resilience. LeBron James couldn't do that if he was not at the top of his game. So what we're trying to do, we're using trauma-informed practices to get our kids to the top of their game. So once they get to the top of the game, now you are the commodity. Now you can go back and reach those other individuals. And so that's what we're doing now.
Thank you so much. You talked about the finish line. I think after hearing this webinar, I think a lot of us can get on that board and help push our students and show them that they can get to that finish line and be successful.
Please do.
It's real. So you see in our comments, they're passing the collection plate because you're preaching today, and we still have so much more to address. That's the blessing in it all, because we're all able to glean from what you're sharing and based on our prior experiences. So I guess now the question is there a relationship between ACEs and SEL from your lens? And I think all of us are going to chime in on this one. Val is like, yep, go ahead and start because we're ready. So is there a relationship between ACEs and SEL?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we talk about adverse childhood experiences, and we've already defined that, right? Trauma-informed teaching is how we address adverse childhood experiences. So the cause and effect, or the problem solution type strategy here. But when we look at social emotional learning, that's the umbrella where all of this falls under. It's sometimes as a teacher, right, it helps to define things by differentiating. So social emotional learning is more proactive. Trauma-informed teaching it has more of a reactive component, because we don't know what our children's triggers are. We don't know. And let me share something with you. And this is, I was talking with a friend last night. Let's say a student is abused and there's a superhero movie on, right? Because everybody's gone and you got an adult and a child, and then abuse takes place, and they're supposed to be watching this superhero movie. And the adults get home, everyone in the family gets home, and this child has dealt with this trauma. How do we expect that child to react moving forward? And especially if they ever come across that superhero again. And you think about that. So you could be in your classroom, and I don't want to even name a superhero because I don't want a negative stigma to go with, Superman, Batman, or Spider-Man, right? But when they see this figure and they trigger, and nobody understands why on earth this child is snapping off. Why they mad, why they cursing, why they fighting, why they don't want to talk. We don't get it, right? So now we have to be reactive. We have to be reactive because we don't know their trigger. We don't know their child's story. And so that's the importance of trauma-informed teaching. So think of it in that lens, because sometimes we associate being reactive as negative, but it's not negative. Sometimes we have no choice but to be reactive. Social emotional learning is proactive. Okay. So in the cases where we're not able to be proactive, we have to be reactive. But with social emotional learning, that's addressing the whole child. That is, let's say you want to take me to the Memphis Grizzlies game. And I say that because I'm in Memphis. Go Grizzlies. You want to take me to the Memphis Grizzlies game, but I don't have a car. I don't have transportation. You have got to get me there. You've got to meet me where I am to get to that game. We don't have time to talk about you 40 years old, you ain't got no car? You mean you ain't got Uber fare? Uber just $15? That's not the issue. The issue is you trying to get me to the game. Please help me get to the game. Come get me. Come scoop me up, right? So when we talk about social emotional learning and meeting students where we are, you're supposed to learn that in the 3rd grade. You can't multiply single digits yet. That's not that's not the move. That's not how we support our students. That's not meeting our students where they are. One thing I love, and I'm gonna tell you, I absolutely love as an English teacher, is our accountable talk, right? So when we think about accountable talk and all of the social and emotional skills that are required to do accountable talk. So when I say, Dr. Covington, I agree with your point that we need to address trauma. And I would also like to add, so what I've done is I've exercised listening skills, I've exercised my memory skills, and I've contributed to this conversation. And even when we disagree, I can say, okay, Dr. Covington, I understand your point about staying on task, but I would also like to respectfully add that sometimes we have to differentiate, right? So now I'm able to express how I feel. I can disagree with you. I ain't gotta say, shut up. That's stupid. That's not emotional intelligence. I can say I respectfully disagree. So absolutely, there's an absolute connect. And many of our students who are dealing with trauma, they don't have those skills that they need to be able to communicate in healthy ways. So we're able to incorporate that into our work through methods like accountable talk.
Absolutely. And I think what you hit on is the need to differentiate per the situation, right? So for me, I have, or in previous years, I had a scholar who witnessed her dad get shot. He made it, but he got shot 10 times. The baby was in the room. And so anytime you called her name or asked her to do something, she would just scream. Now, this is pre-COVID. And so what I realized, I said, somebody's not asking a question. I understand that she won't talk, but she can. And so I would go to the room and ask her, pretty girl, come walk with me. And of course, this is pre-COVID. So I would hold her hand, walk her through the entire building, and we would walk outside and then come back into the front of the building. And I said, now, pretty, I have to work. So you're going to go back to class, or you're going to come in here and chit chat with me while I get my job done. Because see, your job is to learn. My job is to make sure everybody else is doing their job. And I said, so what would you have? And she said, let's talk. Perfect. Because remember, this is the baby that just screams. And so now she wants to talk. And so I said, help me help you. And I let her sit in the principal's chair. And I sat on the other side. I said, you got to school me on why you screaming, pretty girl. Because you still have to pass the 2nd grade. And so when she was sharing that he was shot, and nobody moved her out of the room, there wasn't a rushing of her. And it was almost like everybody, because it wasn't just her and the person and her father in the room. There were a lot of people. And I said, I said, do you want to talk to somebody else? She was like, I don't like talking to people because nobody listens. I said, oh. I said, so what's the next part of this conversation? And so just me knowing, it's not that the child can't talk. Maybe she's just not talking to you. But for me, I'm literally just going to wait. It took us about 10 minutes. My building is not that large, but it took us about 10 minutes because I wanted her to feel comfortable. And she held my hand. Whereas in the classroom, you're not going to get her to stop screaming. You're not going to get her to sit down if she's standing, vice versa. So just making sure that you take the time out, because now her mom is like, well, what did you do? She's now talking again. And I'm thinking in my head, how is this child in your house for months at a time and she's not speaking? I'm no counselor, but what I am is definitely focused on children and their growth. What I am is aware of how listening to a child can change the scope of the dialogue. But also just making sure that the goal at that point was not for the baby to stop screaming. The focus for me was to get her to speak, whatever that looks like. I had another scholar, 8 years old. At the time, I had an 8-year-old. And he would just get so angry, he would punch out windows, cut his hand up. And I'm like, wow. And so I used to whisper, hey, handsome, what is it? Who did it? Let me go get them. Because see, my job is to take care of you. You can't punch out windows. So tell me what happened. They always blaming me for stuff. So the same little thing you just did when you lean back in the chair, that's what I'm used to with some of my scholars. And I said, but is punching out the window the best thing? No, ma'am. And when I told his mom, she was like, well, he doesn't say no, ma'am to me. Mom, that's the first problem. Because again, a level of respect, I'm not disrespecting him because he had an outburst. I'm not disrespecting him because now I got to find somebody to pay for this window. But the thing is, my goal is to serve my scholars, period, point blank, however they come to me. Because if he could come to me differently, he would. If he thought there were another way to show his anger or show his disagreement with what his teacher was saying, he would have. And so for me, I'm not a behavior specialist, but what I am is a servant of children. And so I appreciate you highlighting that relationship, because it tells us certainly we need to read and be accustomed to or dig into how to resolve certain issues. But the other thing is, if you lead with your heart, something will work out for you.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing this story. And you did so many great things there, but two things that I would like to point out that are very important, and I hope our teachers are listening. You gave the child a voice in that first scenario with the young lady. You gave her a voice. And when we think about our babies out here, if the trauma is occurring at home, they probably do not have a voice in the house. We have students that if you raise your voice, if you speak a little bit too loudly, they'll jump because they used to get hit in the mouth, right? So then in the community, if we're talking about a violent community, then they don't have a voice in the community because the community is dangerous. So they rushing to get home and avoid trauma, or mom and dad don't let them go outside, right? Because it's dangerous outside. So now they may not have a voice in the home. They don't have a voice in the community. And so guess what? When they get into their school building, they gon' act out, because guess what? They get to have a voice. And so, as you mentioned, they may not have the vocabulary, or they may not have the social and emotional skills to act out properly, to use their voice properly, to say, hey, I need help. Hey, I'm dealing with some issues at home. Hey, I need to talk to somebody. So when teachers say, pull your pencil out, I ain't got no pencil. That's that act out saying, I need some attention. I need somebody to hear my voice. So you giving that young lady voice, it calmed her and it allowed her to express what she was going through. And then, like you said, she said, I want to talk. So that was a great job. And then in that second situation, what you did, that I also want our educators and parents to pay attention to, especially our parents. Parents, please hear this part. I know I just saw my daddy coming, so I know he on here. Okay, allow our children to de-escalate. Allow them to de-escalate. Allow them to calm down, because that's just like with grown folks. If everybody's excited and loud, nobody's communicating effectively. We have to calm down. So if that child has already been triggered, he's already acting out, we've already got negative behaviors, give them a safe place where they can go ahead and finish their tantrum or whatever's going on. And then once they've de-escalated, we can talk to them. So again, allow our, you did a great job allowing that young man in the second instance to de-escalate and then moving forward from there, because many of our problems, and this is something when we talk about our suspension rates and disciplinary referrals, it went from pick up your pencil, I ain't got no pencil, why you loud, right? And so now the educator is going back and forth with the child and we're going up. Well, I'm finna go get one from Tonio. Who said you could get on my floor, right? And so now you on the floor without permission. That's a demerit. That's a strike. You always want to give me some strike. You don't give nobody else. Don't worry about nobody else. It's me and you. I'm going back and forth, y'all. Just let me go, right? And so now we get to the point where the student that used profanity toward the teacher, and now you got to go home. You got to get out of my room, and you got to go home. And Miss Dr. Covington, you got to send her home. She can't come back in here. All because of
a
pick up
pencil.
your pencil. And we did not allow that child to simply de-escalate so we could redirect. So great job.
Awesome. All right, our next question is up on the screen. It's basically asking, what does the phrase educating the whole child mean from your perspective?
The whole child. So we talk about all dimensions of the child. School is about learning. And so the child needs to learn what the child needs to learn. If the child needs to learn how to disagree respectfully, then we need to teach that child how to disagree respectfully. That goes back to just say our accountable talk, right? But the child also needs to know how to read, how to write, how to do arithmetic. But it's not just that. Some of our children need to understand how to take a shower effectively and why you need to use soap and water, right? Some do not understand that. So when we talk about whole child, whatever this child comes to us lacking, we need to make sure that when we send them out, because we're sending them out into the world, y'all, we sending them out into the world. So when we send them out into the world, we need to make sure that we're sending them with all the skills they need to be successful. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about whole child. Everything that you need to be successful. We talk about the teacher toolbox a whole lot, right? So if all I have in my toolbox is a big old hammer, that's my tool for everything. Even if I'm putting up just a small picture here, I got a big old hammer. I'm a break through my sheetrock, right? Or regardless of what the issue is, I can't get the faucet to turn, but I got this big old hammer. Now I'm gonna tear up my sink. So what we're trying to do is give our children everything we have in our toolbox so that they had it. And you know, when I first bought my house and didn't know anything about, home improvement, I knew a little bit, but when you start working on your own stuff, you realize like, I really need the tool that I need. If I got to go to Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever I got to go, I need that tool. And so when we talk about social emotional learning, we want to have all the tools that we need to give our students all the tools that they need. And right now, trauma-informed teaching and social emotional learning, those are the tools we need for our children. So I'm so glad we're having this discussion. I don't know if my enthusiasm is coming through the screen or not, but these are absolutely the tools that we need to move forward.
Definitely showing up. So how does equity show up? Of course, with the work with DTEC, and just to give a little slide in, we started back in 2014, housed in DC. And so we served over 42 states. And so how does equity show up in your understanding of ACEs? And does that vary when you're talking about urban ACEs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the equity discussion. And first, we got to make sure that we know the difference between equity and equality, right? So equality is giving everyone the same thing. Equity is giving us what we need to achieve our result. So I'm looking at our distinguished panel, and we all have these beautiful glasses on our faces, and I need mine, right? It's not a fashion statement. I need these. So if I need glasses, or if I need to sit in the front, that is equity. You can't just say, well, you got $100 to spend on Marcus. No. If we spending $100 per student, but Marcus cannot see, then we have to take care of Marcus's vision, and we still got to spend that $100 on Marcus after we take care of his vision. So when we're talking about equity, equity is making sure that every child has what they need to be successful. And let's talk about the results of equity, okay? So the end result is we want to be able to have the life that we choose. We talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So this educational system, we're talking about public education, you're preparing me to move towards my life, my liberty, and my pursuit of happiness. So you have to prepare me with whatever I need to make that happen. That's social capital too, right? So if I'm in my community and I don't see a doctor, I don't see a lawyer, I don't see an engineer, I need that social capital. So we need to take some field trips. We need to do some college visits. We need to be in some other areas so that I can claim my social capital, right? One of the best things that happened to me in attending the University of Memphis was the ability to broaden my network. And I have classmates and friends around the country doing amazing things, from working in higher education, working in education, working in the film industry, just so many people that I have access to. And it doesn't hurt that I was in school for 20 years, right? In college for 20 years, but just that social capital. I know that I can call someone. One of my good friends, we were on the school newspaper staff together, and he was able to present to the Tennessee Supreme Court and the Supreme Court, right? Like that, just that experience. And so we have to make sure that when we talk about equity, we're talking about that social capital piece. We have to be able to make sure that our students are able to move into society, and with that, it couples when we talk about bias with that as well. And so I want to touch on this for just a second too. When we talk about our biases, I actually took the bias test, and it told me that I had a slight preference towards African American people. And I said, oh, really? Like that wasn't a surprise for me. But my preference towards African American people probably looks like this, right? If I walk into a room with 100 people and we got 60 white people and whatever, right? We break down the just like the country looks, right? 16 black people, 20 Hispanics, and a couple Asians, other people. My bias might look like going to talk to those black people over there, or standing in the area where those 16 black people are, right? And then when lunch comes, I might say, where y'all going to eat? What y'all going to eat, right? So that's what my bias might look like. Now, I have to make sure that that's not what I do, because the bias is there. Now, if I'm the white person in this scenario, right, and this same bias presents itself, or if I'm the privileged person, it doesn't have to be black and white. We're talking about privilege, right? If I'm the privileged person and y'all don't know it, and I walk into this room, whoever go to lunch with me, y'all don't know I'm the CEO. Y'all don't know that I can write your recommendation. I can get you hired. I can put you in a position to be the next top dog in the organization. And that's what bias does, right? When we put that bias into action and we say, okay, I applied for the position. My resume is on point, but it could be an issue of implicit bias because you're not eating lunch with the right people, because you eat lunch with the people you identify with, and they eat lunch with the people that they identify with. And so when those conversations come up and when it's time to play golf, right, and we're talking about these opportunities, you're not privy to that conversation. So now we go back to equity and social capital. I need to be able to talk to everybody. I need to be able to walk into the room, and whoever's in that room, we need to be able to find a common ground. But see, if we don't establish that early by taking our kids on these field trips and these college visits and exposing them to different walks of life and diversity, then they don't feel as comfortable walking into their room. So guess what? They're going to go over there and just stay where they're comfortable. And we don't even realize, how is it that I've applied for 4,700 positions, and I got 2 interviews because you don't have the social capital. So absolutely, equity makes a huge difference. Is way more underrated. We need to talk about equity a lot more along with trauma.
And so I'm going to go to the comments. Didi made a statement regarding traumatized kids growing up to be traumatized adults, and then teachers sit in that space in their trauma. And so one of the things that is a non-negotiable in my building, every year my teachers have to go through a mental health training that's provided by the National Mental Health Institute. And then this year, because dealing with COVID was a challenge, but what I wanted to focus on with my staff, because my staff can't be teachers if they're not decent humans, right? And so for me, I started writing grants to get the professional development that would speak to how to, well, first, what are trauma-informed strategies? How can you use those strategies to bridge the gaps and build relationships with your scholars? But when I read her statement, Didi's statement, it took me back to my first year teaching. I'm 22. I had a student that was a known gang member, a female student, known gang member. She already had a child, and she was the oldest of 7 children that her mom had. So that's layers, right? Her mom was not 30. And so toward the middle of first semester, her boyfriend had a gun in the house, and her 3-year-old sibling took the gun, killed himself while in the bed next to my student's child. So when you unpack that, that's heavy. What do you say to the first year teacher? I'm 22. Now I'm from Southeast Atlanta, but I just went to Spelman, and we're talking about the conceptual understanding of culturally relevant pedagogy, conceptual frameworks. None of that helped. But I was still responsible for providing a high quality education in this urban setting. So for me, I had to throw away all things from the textbook definition. And this also speaks to the equity equality debate, because yes, they provided me with the necessary tools to handle most situations, but that was a situation that I haven't seen in the textbook yet, right? So that's where you go from that skill to competence. Skill is what you know how to do, and the competence is knowing why you are doing it and how well you're doing it. So my no common sense having self at the time, I said, you know what, maybe I'm just going to keep her and her child every other weekend. Now, for those of us that are educators, you know that is absolutely a no-no. But for me, I needed to take her out of her situation so that she could see there's a better situation. There is hope for you. You can still do what you need to do, though you're in middle school with the baby. So she's doing well now, but if it weren't for me going against what policy said at that point, because that's another issue. A lot of people look at the equality, like Brown versus Board of Education. That was a minute ago. That was 1954. Like, it's 2021 today. We have to do some things differently. We have to serve children where they are. And that goes back to when you mentioned going to the Memphis Grizzlies. We'll switch it to the Atlanta Falcons game. But I'm just saying that goes back to the point, because you have to serve children where they are. And for me, going back to Didi's statement, it brought all of this up, right? But going back to her statement, there is no way in the world I could expect my teachers to teach virtually without giving them strategies and tools to be competent to serve students that are in traumatic situations. Because a lot of people are saying, well, the child abuse rates went down. No, they didn't. We just can't document them right now because the kids are at home. No kid is going to type that into the chat. My mom hit me last night. They're not doing that, right? So it's not that it's not happening. It's that we don't have a reporting mechanism, because the kids are at home with their abusers. So I'm sorry. I'm gonna mute myself, because y'all know.
You're good. And what what you're referring to, there's some research out of Harvard in regards to collaborative problem solving. Dr. Stuart Ablong does great work. And with collaborative problem solving, there are 3 plans. You got plan A, plan B, and plan C. And the plan C is basically when we restructure our expectations, right? Sometimes we have to lift the expectation, right? So when we talk about plan A and we have that directive, we say, okay, this is what I need you to do today. I need you to line up. We on the way to the restroom. That's plan A. I'm gonna give you this directive. But then when we move into plan B is, okay, we're having issues getting to the restroom. What can we do? What's your issue? What's the problem? So we have to get to instead of you got to move. You're gonna move today, right? This child has an issue. There's a reason this child is not moving. So let's get to the issue. And then once we get to your issue, then I can come back with my issue that we need everyone safe. So we have to move together, right? And that last instance, when we move to plan C, maybe that's not the option. Maybe we're going to have to rethink the expectation. So you just walk beside me. You don't have to line up. You go ahead and walk beside me, and we're going to walk with the line, you and me together. So we plan C'd, right? So when plan A doesn't work, plan B, then we got to go to plan C. So what you did was you actually used collaborative problem solving, and you came up with a plan C solution that was effective for your students. So, as I go through these trainings, and I love it as much as I can possibly learn, trauma-informed teaching, nonviolent conflict or reconciliation, like all of this stuff. When I hear you talking, it kind of goes into a box like, okay, that's what she did. She did this here. I feel like I'm filling out a multiple choice, like, which action went with which strategy and which theory. But that was absolutely a great example of collaborative problem solving. Good job again. I see why you the doctor.
I'm just trying to get like you. So we definitely had to address that. And as you see, we're looking at the comments. We're trying to keep focused, but this is amazing dialogue. I just want to take the time to thank you guys for joining as we continue. So I'm sorry, Valerie. I just know I keep disrupting.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, I also think it's important as administrators, we constantly talk about, what our students are dealing with, but we also have to keep in mind that our teachers are dealing with just as many stressors as some of our students. And so I think it's important, especially at my school, we're in the building with kids and teachers are dealing with anxiety. And so I just think, constantly checking in with them, finding out, do you need a break? Do you need to step out? Do you need to step away? Just giving them that moment and that space to, gather their composure and come back and do what it is that they do in the classroom. So I think Dr. Matthews, as well as Dr. Covington, you all both made excellent points. Our next question is, how does Urban ACEs mitigate the effects of ACE?
Well, the philosophies and the strategies are what I hope people pull away in a tangible sense, because again, when we look at the titles of the chapters, put your best foot forward, make a way out of no way, and I can't think of every chapter title off the top of my head, but those philosophies guide us into how we will move forward with our students. So when we look at those philosophies and those foci, right, giving us something to focus on as we direct the youth, and also the strategies, being able to put a specific strategy with a specific behavior. So we know that, hey, when I see a student do this, I can respond by doing this. So it's a guidebook to help those who are supporting students and children. So I want people to walk away with the thinking, the why behind, and also strategies that will help them to move forward.
Thank you so much. One of your chapters, actually, I think it's the last chapter, talking about we are our brother's keepers. brothers and sisters keepers. Like I said, that just resonates with me as a leader, because we have to take care of each other. And I notice that's something that a lot of my teachers do as a team. They are there, whether someone goes out, has to quarantine, they pretty much step in and help out wherever they're needed. So just being that keeper for each other, I think, is also important.
It is. And, we have the responsibility for one another. And that's what that's all about. I think about my life and how fortunate I am. And I saw one of my friends from the neighborhood. He's a pharmacy manager, and I think he's about 32 years old. And I'm so proud of that young man. And we have so many great stories that come from our community. But unfortunately, we also have a lot of tragedies. So many of my friends, and when I say my friends, people that I play basketball with in my backyard, people who are in my home, I've been in their homes, and they're dead. They're incarcerated. They are struggling to make it from day to day, and is very humbling when I think about that. My own godchildren, waiting for their father's release. And so when I think about those situations and I look at my situation, it's like, Marcus, you got to do something. You can't just, run to the suburbs. You can't just, avoid the issues that are going on. You can't just say, okay, I'm good, I made it. And I think about it like, my father was a firefighter, running into a burning building. So when you escape from that burning building and it's people in that building, how can you not go back into that building? How can you just let those people burn up in that building and that you still have breath in you? Now, it's one thing if, look, all you could do was get out, and soon as you had, smoke inhalation and you fell out and you trying to breathe and live, that's one thing. But, for me, and I talked to my dad about this, I say, if I was a middle school English teacher, for the rest of my life, I would feel so happy and be successful, because I know that for me to be where I am is a true blessing. And that, my teachers who use trauma-informed strategies helped me. My parents who supported me, to the best of their ability, they helped me get to this point. So it behooves us to continue. For those of us who can, we've got to continue to reach back and help those who need our assistance.
Thank you so much for that. So we're going to go into the next question, which is, I think we're at the exclusionary discipline. I know we mentioned it a little earlier, but do you think there is a relationship between exclusionary discipline and ACE? And how has exclusionary discipline shown up in your experience? This is where it gets real, a little deeper.
Man,
because all our black babies at home.
Look, so for those of us who are not familiar with the term, so exclusionary discipline is when students are sent away from the academic environment. So that usually looks or sounds like out of school suspension, 3 days, 5 days, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a very unfortunate punishment. And what we have to remember is discipline is meant to teach. Discipline is not meant to punish. So even, when we think about we break down that word, because discipline, we can think about figures historically. I ain't gonna get too deep in this field, but right, we think about people who had disciples. So if this individual had disciples, these were people who studied and learned this discipline from this great teacher, right? So this great teacher didn't say, Peter, I don't mess with you no more. I can't deal with you, Peter. I need you to go back to where you came from, because you denied me, so I don't mess with you no more. That's not what that teacher did, right? So when we have disciples and we're incorporating discipline, right? I have to be my father's disciple. So my father disciplined me. Punishment is not discipline. Punishment is not teaching. Okay. So when we go back and we start talking about roots of slavery and Jim, not Jim Crow, Willie Lynch. We start talking about Willie Lynch and how we're breaking men and breaking people. That was punishment. You gonna run, so I'm gonna cut your foot off. I'm gonna burn an R on your face. I'm gonna put you in chains. That's punishment. And so what's happened is we talk about another great book when we talk about Dr. Michelle DeGruy with that slave syndrome. We've inherited a lot of these behaviors from our slave ancestry. Okay, so now what we doing is we beating our kids because they're not doing what we want them to do. We're punishing them. We're not teaching them. Now, if I need to, hey now, and get your attention, I have your attention now. I need to teach you. If I pick you up physically because you over here by this socket, and I don't want you to stick that fork in that socket and electrocute yourself, I need to pick you up physically, move you to a safe area, and now I need to teach you. It's not safe over there. You should not be over there. So when we think about what we do in the classroom, we're going to bring it together, and we also going to talk about this prison industrial complex. Don't let me forget that, how that ties in as well. When we get into the classroom and a kid cannot do 2 + 2, what do? We teach them. We teach them. If a child cannot put a subject with a verb to make a sentence, what do? We teach them. But when the student does not know how to behave, we send them home. Come on now. We can teach them math, we can teach them English, but we're not going to teach them how to behave. We cannot just send them home. That's that exclusionary discipline. And guess what? Many times the reason we're getting this troubled behavior is because of what's happening at home. So we sending them back to the abuser. And I'm gonna tell you, I'm not pointing fingers. This happened to me. I was a behavior analyst in our achievement school district here in Tennessee, and I was in one of the most challenging schools in the state. And I had a young man who was over age for grade. He was not reading or doing math on his grade level, and he was physically very mature. So we had an instance where we're talking about somebody who fits the description to be the perfect bully, right? And so several attempts have been made to redirect this young man, conversations, and we got to a point where I had to give him them days, as the principals used to say, right? We gave him them days. And so he got those days, that suspension. And he had a younger sister who also attended the middle school. They were actually in the same grade, but she was, younger than him. And he still walked her to school. And he walked her to school, and he turned around to walk back into the neighborhood. And I almost cried. Because, and I'm in my feelings now because I still wonder how he's doing. But just the simple fact that the best thing Dr. Matthews could come up with was to send that young man away. As bad as he needed a mentor, as bad as he needed somebody to talk to, as bad as he needed trouble dealing with his behavior, I sent him home. And nobody was at home. So now, where am I sending you to? And I'm sending you to the local gang members. I'm sending you to the robbers and the killers that really exist in the neighborhood. They really there, y'all. And so, I was talking to a friend. I said, I'm so thankful for the parents I had, and I don't ever put forth the image that I was just about that life. I made A's and B's. But we had the killers and the robbers in the neighborhood for sure. Like I can remember walking home, and I think I tell this story in the book. I'm walking home from basketball practice, and a guy gets robbed, right here in my face. Like, everybody could have died. So like, these are real scenarios. And so when we're sending our kids home, what are we sending them to when we're excluding them? And that's the exact segue to our prison industrial pipeline and our school to prison pipeline. So what happens is, when you're not in the classroom, you're not learning the material. Very simple. We're going to walk the dog slow. Okay. So if you're not learning the material, you're probably not going to pass this assessment. If you're not going to pass this assessment, you're probably not going to pass this class. If you don't pass the class, you're probably not promoted to the next grade. If you're not promoted to the next grade, you're more likely to drop out. If you drop out, you probably don't have the skills necessary to gain for employment. If you don't get gain for employment, you're more likely to take on means of attaining money that are illegal. So now that you're involved in illegal activity, you're more likely to go to jail. And once you get to jail, look in our Constitution, where it says slavery is illegal and abolished unless you have been convicted of a crime and under the basically under the now direction of our prison system. So you can still be enslaved. When we talk about slavery is illegal in certain instances. But once you get locked up, you good. You are a ward of the state to be used as you are used. And we know that now we have private institutions who are investing in prisons. People getting money for having people in jail. And guess what? Just like in any institution, any organization, you have to have people doing the work in order to get a benefit. If I'm the CEO of fast food chain, somebody got to flip my burgers. Somebody got to drop my fries. And we all know we appreciate the person who's dropping those fries and flipping those burgers. So when we go through, we can get our food and go home and be happy. And it's the same principle. When we build in jails, you got to have people to populate the jail. You have to have people. Now, look, we creating jobs. We got correctional officers, and we got all of these other individuals who are being employed. We got finance and all of these jobs being created, but at whose expense? We look at who is populating these prisons. Black people, particularly Black men, right? 2/3 of the jail population, but less than a quarter of the American population. So we going to jail at a high rate. And how are we determining that? I saw somebody put it in the post that we looking at 3rd grade literacy. If you're not reading on grade level, by 3rd grade, we got a jail ready for you. So exclusionary practices, suspending our boys, suspending our kids, we are starting this process of sending them to prison.
Thank you so much for that. And I want to say, my first year as an assistant principal, I had a drawer in my office. And so teachers would just write referrals on kids for the smallest thing. And I would call the kid in and I would sit and I would talk with them. But that referral never got entered in the system. And I had a drawer. And by the end of the school year, that drawer was full. And of course, I just shredded it. But you have to offer as many chances as possible to our students. And then I had to then also go back to that teacher, because a lot of times teachers feel like, well, I wrote the referral and nothing was done. Something was done, but unfortunately, you don't get to dictate what is done. And so I really feel like offering those chances to students is really beneficial to them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing that we have to remember, we have to, as leaders, we have to support our teachers, and the support is the training. The support is putting what they need in their toolbox. You know, when I leave a school and the principal says, I'm glad you came, you helped my teachers, right? When a teacher says, I'm gonna use that, Dr. Matthews, I'm gonna use that in my classroom. We've helped to break this school to prison pipeline. So, you know, we're all in this together. And that's, you know, we have to remember that, you know, those teaching, I spent 10 years in a classroom. That's hard work. And we need a break sometimes, but we have to understand, like we have to have that tool in our toolbox. I keep going back to that toolbox so that we can redirect this situation. We can recognize, oh, okay, that was just some junk behavior. And that's what I call it. We junk behavior. You tapping your pencil and you make a noise, that's junk behavior. We can't let tapping your pencil escalate to a yelling match, screaming match. Now he didn't use profanity, now we want to send him home. We got to be able to de-escalate a lot earlier. We got to be able to identify those behaviors and educate and re-educate our teachers and give them as much as we possibly can, because we love them and we need them. Every teacher that's out here, we love you and we need you. And hopefully we can do a better job of training and supporting.
And Dr. Matthews, you brought up a good point. So I'm sitting here staring at the question on the screen about the relationship between ED and ACE. But for me, I'm always thinking strategy, you know, going a little deeper. And so I now see the question as, what is the significance of the relationship between exclusionary discipline and the prison pipeline? Because unfortunately, African Americans are being suspended at over a 40% rate of difference. So what that may mean, if white students or students that are non-minority are being suspended at 14%, African American students are being suspended at a 54%. That's a problem. So that equity and equality has a place in this conversation as well. I thought back to, I had a non-minority teacher in my third grade classroom. The student was misbehaving. The student had a couple of disabilities, behavioral and medical, but the student wanted to color. The teacher took the coloring book and tore the coloring book up. Now, for those that know me, y'all know I didn't do so well initially. My initial thoughts are not pure. They were not of any highly efficacious teacher. I was livid because we're talking about an autistic student that just wanted to color because maybe that was the mechanism that could get her to the next level at that moment. And so I really had to, one, calm the student down first. As a result, the student tore up the classroom. When I say threw chairs, the teacher had a personal animal in the classroom. She had her personal computer in the classroom. And so I took the scholar back to the room, and we're going to call her little Cece. I said, Cece, was this necessary? Well, she tore up my stuff, so I tore up hers. I said, but you messed up my classroom. She said, well, Dr. Covington, I didn't mess up any of your stuff. Everything that I messed up was hers personally. And so for the child that's disrupted, that is very aware of what she's doing, what can I say to little Cece except, so what's next? She said, I guess I got to clean up. I said, well, I appreciate it. But the thing was, what do I do with that teacher, though? Because I'm hot. I went to Spelman, where we learn how to serve minority children or provide culturally responsive teaching, culturally responsive leadership. So what I did was I took the entire grade level to a de-escalation training. And I didn't send them, I took them. We're all going to get in my car. We're all going to go to this 8-hour training. Now, keep in mind, I still have a building to run. But you know what? What we did to little Cece was a problem enough to where I'll disrupt my schedule to make sure you don't harm another one of my scholars, because it was a problem. And definitely coloring is a form of therapy, Dawn. I appreciate that, which is why she had it. But guess what the principal also had to do? Go buy the new Hello Kitty coloring book with the new erasable markers, color pencils, crayons. Like, we were lit about to get little Cece her materials back. And that was a part of her redirection, because a lot of times, going back to the consequence, we punish the children and we haven't told them why it was wrong, showed them why it was wrong, and figured out a way to restore. whatever the situation is, or restore the behavior or redirect the behavior. Because I said, you do know you have to apologize. She said, well, she apologized to me. She absolutely will. And so that was a part of taking the entire third grade team with me to the training. We went to lunch and I said, you got to give me a 3, 2, 1. I'll order your food. I'll pay for your food, but you're going to have to give me 3 things you learned, 2 things you will never do again. And what is your one next step for tomorrow? And so stepping outside of the box, because again, my scholars deserve the best. And that also took me, when we're talking about the Black male point, that took me to, I was the first female leader of an all boys school here in the Metro Atlanta area. I had 100% grad rate. That does not mean those babies didn't give me a run for my money. But what I had to do was give them the opportunity to speak. So that voice, just allowing a child to speak. And even for boys, because again, I had a lot of female teachers, but there were all of my leadership team was all female. And we were able to get 100% grad rate. We were able to get all of our students to their next step. So I just wanted to share that. I'm sorry, but I'm sitting here and I'm like, Lord, we have to make sure that we are serving the child in front of us and not who we think we should have.
And I want to commend you for being such an advocate for our students. We have to advocate for our children. If we do not, who will? And we also have to ask ourselves, how are we looking at our students? And how are our students being perceived? In the chapter of my book where I say, put your best foot forward, we talk about how perception is so powerful right now. And, you know, I noticed the difference when I walk around with my suit and tie on. It's obvious that people come to me for a handshake this way, right? I hope I'm in the screen. They come to me for their handshake. And when I got on my sweater and my chain, it's like, what up? You giving me a high five, you don't give me some dap. So I can see how I'm being viewed. So how is society viewing our babies, our young men, when we look at the news media? And when you see us, we've got to be rapping, right? We got to be entertaining. We've got to be dunking a ball or catching a ball, or we're committing a crime. So if I don't recognize you from athletics and entertainment, you gotta be a criminal. And that's what we have to erase. And for those of us who know that's not the case, we've got to advocate. We must advocate. I've been so proud of our Black Lives Matter movement and individuals in the community who have determined that they are going to advocate for our community. Because if we don't, it's not going to happen. And, you know, we look at the images. I'm a journalism major. And so I understand that if it bleeds, it leads. And I understand that fear will make people tune in. When you show that commercial about the murders that just took place and this gang fight that just happened, people are going to tune in because we're drawn to these situations, right? So we're curious as to who shot who, and we run to the fight. We had to learn, stop running to the fight. So for those of us who know better, we have to change that narrative, and eventually we will be able to move into an entirely different direction, to where now when you see a young, and one of my friends, he recently posted, stop telling every Black man that's 6'7" he need to be playing basketball, that he looks like a basketball player. Why doesn't he look like an engineer? You know, why doesn't he look like a musician? Why doesn't he look like a doctor? Simply because he's 6'7". And guess what? There's research that goes with that too. So what we've learned is when our children develop faster physically, maturing physically, we gear them towards physical activities and sports, right? So now the one who matures a little slower, the one who is not so big and strong, we go ahead and teach him how to read. We go ahead and sit down with him and make sure that he has these academic skills. So we're not taking them to football practice and basketball practice every other day. We're reading with this one. So we got to be careful with how we prepare our young people for their respective futures and how we allow them to see themselves. And there's nothing wrong with being an athlete. I ran track, played basketball, ran cross country. My brothers played football and basketball. We were all athletes. But we cannot ignore that academic preparation. And we have to make sure that we're seeing our scholars, as you said, as just that.
Thank you. So before we get to our last question, we are going to do some giveaways. We have this amazing book that we are going to give away. And so you do have to be present to win. But what we are going to do, I'm going to share my screen. And you guys should see a wheel of names, and it was pulled randomly, the names of the people that were in the room. And so my colleagues are going to give me a thumbs up when they can see the screen. And hopefully it'll happen sooner than later. Oh no, you guys see my screen. So that's probably not right. So let's see if I can do it this way. Let's see. What do you see? What do you see? I'm just gonna go for it.
We got it now.
Is that okay?
We can
Ms. Morgan, I can go for it.
go for it. I can see it.
Okay, so let's see who's going to be our first recipient. So, can some of our colleagues that are on, is Cassandra still present?
Can you share the screen again? It stopped. The wheel's not showing now.
Oh, it did it on its own. So let me share again. So our first winner was Cassandra. So I'm going to go ahead and press it again. Is Cassandra still on? Because if Cassandra's not on, we can, oh yes, Cassandra Smith. So if you could, please inbox me your address and I'll mail it to you, please. So that's one book. Congratulations, Cassandra. I am going to attempt to spin again. So yay, yay, yay. Is Sharnita still on? Are you guys still able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
So is Dr. Charnita West still on? We're gonna wait and see. She'll come in if she's still on. Dr. Charnita West is the absolute best reading specialist in the land.
She says, I'm here.
Congratulations, Dr. West. Text me your address.
I love your feedback, Dr. West.
So yes, we're gonna go again for the next person. Okay, congratulations. Can y'all see? We have Dee Dee. So shout out to the Stone Mountain family. I have some teachers, the DeKalb County School District. We are heavy on here today. So kudos to Dee Dee. If you could inbox me at CC Covington Dee Dee and I'll mail you your book. And last but not least, so we have Sean Morgan.
My sister.
Congratulations. So we have Sean, Charnita, Dee Dee, and and Cassandra. So thank you guys so much. We're going to go back to our last question. So for those of you that names were called, please message me, inbox me your addresses so that I can mail them out to you. And we are back. So kudos, kudos, kudos.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get to our last question. Our last question is for Dr. Matthews. What are some practices that all schools or stakeholders should implement to ensure that students who have experienced trauma are reached?
Okay, I'll go with three that are really simple. One, and we've talked about giving voice. We have to allow our students to speak. They must have a voice. We have to understand the student concern. And this is research based. We say common sense, but it's also research based. Until we know what is really bothering the youth, we are not able to get to the root of the problem. And so what happens is many times we focus on the problem behavior. So the problem is I'm cursing, right? I'm using profanity. So instead of Marcus, stop cursing, Marcus, we need you to quit using profanity. That's a part of it, but we have to understand the why behind. And in understanding the why behind, I have to tell you why I'm cursing. I have to let you know why I'm frustrated. Maybe someone has triggered me. Maybe someone has done something to me. Maybe there's something internal going on, and I'm lashing out. So we have to allow that student voice. We have to listen. Okay, so that's the first thing we want to make sure that we're doing is listening to our youth and allowing them to have a voice. Second is, and I'm going from simple to hard to a little hard. Okay, so listening should be easy. Should be. The second is redirection. And redirection, I talk about in terms of driving a car, right? So if we're driving this car, and I'm trying to get in front of the camera, and we notice that it starts veering one way, right? We gonna straighten that wheel up. We're gonna straighten that wheel up. And if we don't straighten that wheel, we know that we're gonna have an accident. And so I ask my teachers all the time, how many times are you gonna straighten up your wheel on the way home? Are you gonna do it one time, 2 times, 3 times, and then say, I'm tired of straightening this wheel. I already straightened this wheel once. You're not gonna do that because guess what? The moment you don't straighten that wheel, you're gonna have an accident and you can hurt yourself or die. So you're gonna straighten that wheel every time it goes off course. So when we redirect our students, we're gonna redirect our students every time they need redirection. We're not gonna go, I just told you that this morning. I ain't telling you no more. Yes, you are. You're gonna tell them every time they need to be told. Okay. And then we're gonna get some regulation and we're gonna work on some plan B strategies of maybe how we can decrease the regularity of the problem behavior, but we're gonna continue to redirect. Just like you're gonna continue to fix your steering wheel until you get to your destination. And then, okay, I need a wheel alignment because I'm tired, Michael. If it's veering too much too often, you need a wheel alignment. But guess what? Even once you got the car that's riding straight, every now and then you're gonna have to redirect. You're gonna have to hold that wheel. So redirection is a great strategy. And then my third may be my most difficult for some of us grown folk who not gonna let folks tell us what they're gonna do in our classroom and in our hallway and in our building, right? I'm sure we've all used this before. And you know what? I actually was a leader in my alma mater. So I really felt like this is my school. I graduated from West Side. So these are my halls. No, they're not. It's not about you. It is not about you. Remove the personal mirror. You did not go into education for it to be about you, your building, your hallway, your cafeteria, your auditorium, your classroom, your desk. It's about the child. So in removing that personal mirror, we always have to remember, I've been bald head disses and I've been bees and I've been woo, and if it wasn't for a shame, it might affect my self-esteem if I didn't love myself so much. So I had to remember this child. I didn't do anything to the child except say good morning. If I say good morning and your response is bald head this, that's not me. It's not about me. You got something going on that needs to be addressed. And so as the adult in the room, as the professional in the room, I got to remove my personal mirror and not be worried about what my head look like and why they keep talking about my bald head and what makes you think you can talk to me this way. That's not the issue. Now we can definitely talk about respect, right? We can hold a quick conversation about now we're gonna have some professional boundaries, and you're gonna respect me and I'm gonna respect you. Now we're also gonna talk about why you're feeling so angry this morning. Why do you feel the need to degrade me? Does that make you feel better? Did somebody make you feel bad this morning? All right. Are you upset because who upset you? Why do you want to upset me? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we've got to make sure that we're dropping that personal mirror and we're not making it about us.
Well, Dr. M, we knew you were going to bring a word, okay? And that's exactly what you did. I am super, super, super excited to have shared in this space with you. And I think I can say the same for Ms. Simmons. We have learned a lot. Yeah. We've learned that the pot of gold at the end of the tunnel is definitely resilience, because otherwise you got to recover in order to be resilient. The 3 components of ACE, abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. The relationship between ACEs and SEL, like we've learned a lot. And so what we are going to do, quit taking it personal. Yes, Miss Honey. I'm going to share our last slide for those of you that want to get in contact with Dr. Matthews. I want to make sure that that information is projected on the screen for you to grab a quick photo. And we have 5 minutes, so any outgoing messages you have, we're going to close out. But once you guys let me know that you can see the screen, we can continue.
Yeah, we can see it. And I look forward to visiting you guys in Atlanta, working with your staffs. I just appreciate the opportunity and Dr. Covington, the invitation to come to this venue. Very much so appreciated. And for those out there who receive books, I love feedback. Feel free to give me feedback. I'm trying to get better every day and be better every day and support the work the best way possible. So constructive criticism is welcome and appreciated. And this work we do is so special and it's so important because we are the change. You know, we are history. And when we look at where we are in our current status in the country, where we've had a change in presidency, we've dealt with COVID, we've dealt with so many different issues. Social justice has moved to the forefront to a degree where it has not been since the civil rights movement. We have not seen the social justice arena as active as it is now since the 1950s and the 1960s. And so we will be asked by our children and our children's children, what were you doing in 2020 and 2021 when there was a pandemic and there were protests and, you know, all of these issues were happening simultaneously? What was your role? And so now we have the opportunity to address that and say, this is what I did. I was advocating for children. I was working to make our educational platform more equitable. I was teaching teachers. I was working with students. So we have a great opportunity in front of us. And I applaud you all for being a part of what we're doing. And I welcome the opportunity to work with you all as best I can.
Thank you so much. And so Valerie's going to share the information regarding how to keep in contact with the DTEC program as well as the Georgia Dream Team?
On your screen right now, these are the 8 members of the Georgia Tag Equity Warriors team. Please text join tag at 51555. Please follow us on all the different social media outlets that you see posted below. If you could just grab a snapshot with your cell phone or your camera of those media outlets, we greatly appreciate it. And we ask that you also complete the survey. The link is posted at the bottom. But if you would please just submit your comments regarding the survey, let us know how much you enjoyed this and what did you obtain from today's webinar. We would greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Matthews. We appreciate you spending your Saturday morning with us. We appreciate all of the participants we had. We had up to about 30 people on Facebook, but we also had people joining in or tuning in from YouTube. So we are super grateful for this experience with you guys. If you want to get in contact with myself or Valerie, our information is on the screen right now, but we are grateful for you all sharing in this space with us this morning. Again, as Ms. Simmons mentioned, please, please, please complete the survey. For those of you that are on Facebook, it is in the thread. For those of you that are on other social media platforms, because we are on YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, it's so many. The banner is running across the bottom. But again, we are grateful for your presence. Shout out to Dr. Johnny Cruz Craig, our fearless leader who has been leading this work since 2014. So we are just grateful to have you guys. And you guys have a great weekend.
But we need numbers. We need to show up at school board meetings. We need to show up at county commissioner meetings. We need to have someone on the agenda to talk and know what they're talking about to